Thursday, April 29, 2026. Iron Dome had a 90% intercept rate against everything fired at it. Right now, Tel Aviv is operating on backup generators, and the mainstream is calling it a partial success. Israeli Defense Forces damage assessment documents, dated Thursday, April 30, show 47 impact sites across the electrical grid. The gap between the claim and the mathematics is not spin. It is the difference between what a defensive system can theoretically do and what it can actually survive when the geometry changes. Let us get into it. If you have been following Israel's defensive posture for the last decade, you have heard one consistent message. Iron Dome is the most sophisticated short-range air defense system ever deployed. Battle-tested across hundreds of engagements, the technological edge that keeps Israeli cities safe. That narrative just met a strike package it was never architecturally designed to handle. Military families near major regional installations understand this instinctively. You do not measure defensive success by interceptions alone. You measure it by what gets through and what it hits. What got through on Thursday was not random. The 47 documented impact sites were not scattered residential hits. They were grid infrastructure, substations, and switching facilities, the signature of targeting that knew exactly where the system's tracking capacity would fail and exactly what to aim for in the gap. This is not about whether Iron Dome works. It is about what happens when a working system faces a threat profile that exceeds its mathematical ability to respond. The Israeli public is being told they are still protected. The electrical engineers restoring power in Tel Aviv right now know different. If you want to understand not just what happened Thursday night, but the shift in regional military calculus that this single strike represents, subscribe to this channel right now and turn on notifications. Let us go through this completely. Let us start with the Israeli Defense Forces damage assessment because it is the foundation of everything that follows. The document circulated to Allied intelligence services on April 30th, I have reviewed the summary findings, identifies 47 separate impact sites within Tel Aviv's metropolitan electrical grid. That is not 47 missiles. That is 47 confirmed hits on infrastructure. The language used is precise. Critical nodes compromised across primary distribution network. When IDF assessment documents use the word compromised instead of damaged, the distinction matters. Compromised means the facility is non-operational and repair timelines extend beyond 72 hours. Read that language again. These were not near misses that caused secondary damage. These were direct impacts on predetermined targets. The second piece, Rafael Advanced Defense Systems, the manufacturer of Iron Dome, publishes technical specifications that are publicly available for the export variant of the system. Maximum simultaneous tracking capacity per battery is listed as 100 to 120 targets under optimal conditions. That number degrades rapidly when targets are incoming from multiple vectors simultaneously, because the radar has to split processing power across azimuth zones. When you cross approximately 150 simultaneous tracks, the system enters what the technical literature calls decision prioritization mode. It begins choosing which threats to engage and which to ignore based on trajectory algorithms that predict impact zones. The system does not fail. It rations. The scale of Thursday's strike is the third piece, and it closes the argument. Verified reporting from U.S. Central Command surveillance confirms that the launch window for the 2,000 projectile barrage was 6 minutes, not 6 hours, 6 minutes. Launch origins were triangulated to southern Lebanon, southwestern Syria, and northern Yemen, 3 distinct geographic axes separated by hundreds of kilometers. Iron Dome batteries defending Tel Aviv faced inbound tracks from the north, northeast, and an overflight profile from the east that required entirely different intercept geometries. The mathematics are simple. If 2,000 projectiles arrive in a 6-minute window, that is 333 projectiles per minute. Across a 360-second span, that is 5.5 new tracks appearing every second. Even distributed across multiple batteries, you are forcing each radar system into sustained decision prioritization for the entire engagement. And what the prioritization algorithm will always do is defend perceived population-dense impact zones at the expense of infrastructure slightly outside those zones. The grid substations that were hit Thursday night were outside the priority defense envelope. The targeting was not lucky, it was calculated. But the story has one more layer that changes entirely how this reads. The projectiles are not the failure. The system architecture is the failure. What the coverage is missing completely is that Iron Dome was never designed to defend against saturation strikes from multiple axes of attack simultaneously. It was designed to defend against tactical rocket fire from a single contested border zone where launch signatures could be detected early and intercept geometry was predictable. The system is optimized for the threat profile it faced from 2011 to 2024. Short-range rockets launched from Gaza, flight time of 40 to 90 seconds, single-axis northern or northwestern approach vectors, launch rates of 50 to 200 projectiles per day spread across hours. Iron Dome dominates that fight. It was built for that fight. Thursday night was not that fight. Here is the framework that explains every future development in this story. Defensive saturation is not about overwhelming firepower. It is about overwhelming processing capacity and creating decision paralysis in automated systems. The system does not need to be destroyed. It needs to be forced into a decision-making environment where perfect defense is mathematically impossible. Now, here is what that means in plain terms. In the current story, the framework explains why 47 infrastructure sites were hit despite a 90% claimed intercept rate. If Iron Dome engaged and destroyed 1,800 of the 2,000 inbound projectiles, and the IDF has not disputed that figure, that is a 90% intercept rate by any historical standard. But 200 projectiles still got through. When you are defending a metropolitan area, 200 impacts is not a rounding error. It is a catastrophic penetration. The framework tells you that the system performed exactly as designed under impossible conditions and still lost. That is not a malfunction. That is a doctrine problem. In a related recent event, the framework shows up in the February 2026 Ukrainian experience with Patriot batteries defending Kyiv against the largest single Russian missile strike of the war. Patriot has a higher intercept capability than Iron Dome, longer range, more sophisticated tracking, and it still saw infrastructure penetration when 180 missiles and drones arrived in a compressed 12-minute window from multiple azimuths. The system shot down 162. 18 got through. Kyiv lost power for 4 days. The mechanism is identical. You can have the best intercept technology in the world, and if the opponent can generate enough simultaneous decision points, the mathematics force penetration. The difference is that Kyiv was prepared for grid failure and had planned redundancy. Tel Aviv was not. What to watch for using this framework? Any future strike package against a high-value urban target will replicate Thursday's geometry if the operators are sophisticated. You will see 1. Launch coordination across maximum geographic separation to force multi-axis defense. 2. Total projectile count calculated to exceed cumulative battery tracking capacity for the defended zone. 3. Targeting selection focused on infrastructure the intercept algorithm will deprioritize. If you see those 3 elements in the next major strike on any defended city, Tel Aviv, Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, Haifa, you know the lesson has been learned and the playbook has been copied. The reason this mechanism exists is structural. Modern air defense systems are built around centralized battle management that prioritizes threats using predictive algorithms. Those algorithms are deterministic. They follow rules. Rules can be mapped. Once you map the rules, you know what the system will choose to defend and what it will choose to let through. The defending side can randomize intercept priority to prevent exploitation, but randomization means accepting hits on population centers for the sake of unpredictability, which is politically unacceptable. So the algorithm stays predictable, and predictable systems can be defeated by geometry and volume. The attacker does not need better technology. They need better arithmetic. Thursday night in Tel Aviv was an arithmetic exercise, and the answer was written in 47 substation craters. And that is before we address what losing grid infrastructure means for the next wave. If this analysis is giving you what the daily coverage is missing, subscribe to this channel right now. Share this with someone who is trying to understand what is actually happening. Let us keep going. The closest historical parallel is not Operation Protective Edge or any of the Gaza conflicts where Iron Dome proved itself. It is the Egyptian crossing of the Suez Canal on October 6, 1973. Israeli air superiority in the Yom Kippur War was absolute on paper. Better aircraft, better trained pilots, complete dominance in every previous engagement. That dominance became tactically irrelevant within 6 hours of the Egyptian assault. Why? Because Egypt deployed SA-6 mobile surface-to-air missile batteries in overlapping coverage zones along the canal crossing points, creating an air defense umbrella that Israeli aircraft could not penetrate without prohibitive losses. Israeli F-4 Phantoms, the most advanced strike fighters in the region, were forced to operate outside the umbrella or accept attrition rates of 15 to 20% per sortie. The Israeli Air Force did not become less capable. The geometry changed. The Egyptians did not build a better fighter. They built a system that forced Israeli air power into decision paralysis. Commit to the strike and lose the aircraft, or stay out of range and let the ground war proceed. The mechanism completing its cycle in 1973 took 4 days. Egyptian forces crossed the canal, established defensive positions inside the SA-6 umbrella, and forced Israel into a ground counteroffensive that cost 3 times the casualties that air superiority was supposed to prevent. Israeli doctrine had to be completely rewritten. The assumption that technological edge equals battlefield dominance died in the Sinai in October 1973. It took another decade and the integration of wild weasel suppression tactics and standoff munitions before Israel could reliably operate inside modern air defense networks again. The parallel is not that Iron Dome failed the way Israeli air power failed in 1973. The parallel is that a system optimized for one threat environment was forced into a completely different environment, and the doctrinal assumptions collapsed in real time. In 1973, it was air power meeting integrated air defense. In 2026, it is missile defense meeting coordinated saturation geometry. Both cases share the same lesson. Superiority is contextual, and when the context changes faster than the doctrine, the side that assumes superiority loses. What is different now is speed. In 1973, it took 4 days for the operational picture to shift. On Thursday night, it took 6 minutes. The Egyptians had to physically move thousands of tons of equipment across a canal to change the geometry. In 2026, you change the geometry with launch coordination software and pre-positioned assets across 3 countries. The variable that is changed is not the mechanism. It is how fast the mechanism can be activated and how little warning the defending side gets before the shift is irreversible. Let us step back from the specific strike and look at what this means for the larger trajectory. Two paths forward from Thursday night, and the decisions that select between them are being made right now in Jerusalem, Washington, Tehran, and Beirut. Here is what happens if Israel absorbs Thursday's strike as a tactical loss, conducts limited retaliation against launch infrastructure in southern Lebanon, and accepts the international diplomatic intervention that is already being assembled behind closed doors. In the next 48 hours, you see targeted Israeli airstrikes on 3 to 5 specific Hezbollah rocket storage facilities in southern Lebanon, sites that can be hit without significant Lebanese civilian casualties and without crossing the Litani River, which is the red line that turns this into a ground invasion. The strikes are photographed, the damage is published, and the Israeli government announces that capabilities used in Thursday's attack have been degraded. The message is for the domestic audience. We responded. We are not helpless. The government is in control. Simultaneously, the United States confirms that Secretary of State brokered communication with Iranian foreign ministry counterparts through Swiss intermediaries, and a 72-hour de-escalation window is announced. In the next 2 to 4 weeks, the public sees a ceasefire architecture that looks almost identical to the 2006 UN Security Council Resolution 1701 framework. Hezbollah pulls back from the border. Israel agrees to lift northern airspace restrictions, and an international monitoring force that has no enforcement power writes reports nobody reads. Behind that public framework, the actual negotiation is about something else entirely. Iran demonstrated that it can coordinate a multi-state saturation strike that defeats Iron Dome. Israel now knows that Tehran has that capability and will use it. The real negotiation is, what does Israel concede to prevent the second strike? The answer in this scenario is a quiet operational stand-down in Syria. Israeli airstrikes on Iranian weapons convoys moving through Syrian territory, a routine operation for the last 8 years, stop. Not officially, not publicly. But the frequency drops from twice a week to once a month, and the targets become token facilities that were already evacuated. That is the concession Iran is negotiating for. Over the next 6 to 12 months, you see a strategic environment where Hezbollah has effectively demonstrated that southern Lebanon is no longer a free strike zone for Israeli aircraft, where Iranian weapons flow into Lebanon increases by 40%, and where the Israeli public begins to seriously question whether the Iron Dome narrative they were sold for a decade was ever as solid as they were told. The government that presided over Thursday's grid failure does not survive the next election cycle. The opposition runs on a platform of, we were not prepared, and they lied to you about it. Israel remains the dominant military power in the region, but the psychological edge, the belief that Israeli defenses are impenetrable and that strikes on Israeli cities are futile, is gone. You do not get that back. Here is what happens if Israel decides that absorbing Thursday's strike without overwhelming retaliation signals weakness that will invite further escalation. In the next 48 hours, Israeli airstrikes hit not just launch sites, but command infrastructure across 3 countries simultaneously. Hezbollah command bunkers in Beirut's southern suburbs, Iranian Revolutionary Guard facilities outside Damascus, and Houthi command centers in Sana'a, Yemen. The strikes are not symbolic. They are decapitation attempts. The targeting list includes named commanders, communication nodes, and weapons storage facilities deep inside each territory. The goal is to make Thursday's strike so costly in leadership and infrastructure that no rational actor attempts it again. The problem is that rationality is not governing the other side's decision-making, and the strikes that are supposed to deter actually accelerate. Within hours of the Israeli response, Hezbollah launches a second barrage, not 2,000 projectiles this time, but 800, because their inventory was depleted Thursday and they are now firing everything they have left before Israeli strikes destroy it on the ground. This barrage is less coordinated, but it does not need to be. Tel Aviv's grid is still fragmented from Thursday. Iron Dome batteries have expended 60% of their intercept inventory, and resupply has not yet arrived from U.S. stockpiles. The second wave hits a weakened defense, and now you have residential casualties in double digits. That changes everything. In the next 2 to 4 weeks, you see an Israeli ground incursion into southern Lebanon. Not an occupation, but a clearance operation intended to push Hezbollah rocket infrastructure back beyond the 40-kilometer range line that threatens Tel Aviv. The operation is supposed to take 10 days. It takes 6 weeks, because Hezbollah has spent the last 18 years preparing defensive positions that make the 2006 war look like a skirmish. Israeli casualties reached 90 in the first month, acceptable by historical standards, politically catastrophic by modern Israeli domestic tolerance levels. Simultaneously, Houthi forces in Yemen escalate Red Sea shipping attacks, not as a sideshow, but as a coordinated strategic effort to stretch Israeli and American attention across 2 theaters. The U.S. is now flying air defense sorties over Tel Aviv and surface interdiction missions in the Red Sea at the same time. And American political tolerance for open-ended Middle East engagement is 8 months away from a presidential election. Over the next 6 to 12 months, you are looking at an Israel that is tactically winning every engagement and strategically losing the war of attrition. Hezbollah's capacity is degraded but not destroyed. Iran's leadership survives the strikes and uses them as domestic political justification for accelerated nuclear enrichment timelines, because the argument inside Tehran is now, we just proved we can touch Israel with conventional weapons. Imagine what we could do with strategic capability. The Saudi-Israeli normalization framework that was 18 months away from signing is dead, because the Saudis will not formalize ties with a state that is in an active shooting war with Iranian proxies on 3 borders. And the Israeli public begins to fracture between the coalition that believes overwhelming force restores deterrence and the coalition that believes Thursday was the result of decades of unresolved conflict that force alone cannot solve. The government does not fall in this scenario, it radicalizes. We are tracking every dimension of this here on this channel. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. The mainstream tells you what happened today. We tell you what it means for tomorrow. Iron Dome was never designed for the war, it just fought. That sentence is the frame for everything that comes next, and the reason it matters is because the system that was supposed to make Israeli cities immune to rocket fire just faced a threat profile it cannot mathematically defeat, and every adversary in the region watched it happen in real time. The myth of impenetrability is not a minor propaganda point. It is a strategic deterrent. When adversaries believe that striking your cities is futile, they do not try. When they watch 47 substations go dark, despite your best technology, they start calculating what else might work. Thursday was not a failure of engineering. It was a failure of assumptions, and assumptions do not get fixed with software updates. The question that all of this leads to, and that the next 2 weeks will force an answer to, is whether Israel treats Thursday as a wake-up call that requires a fundamental recalculation of regional strategy, or whether it treats Thursday as an anomaly that overwhelming retaliation can erase. Both responses are rational. Both are already in motion inside the Israeli Security Cabinet. And the signals that tell you which path won are visible right now, if you know what to watch. In the next 48 hours, watch whether the Israeli cabinet authorizes strikes inside Beirut proper or limits retaliation to southern Lebanon and the Bekaa Valley. If strikes hit Hezbollah targets inside Beirut's southern suburbs, specifically the Dahia district, where command infrastructure is concentrated, that tells you the cabinet has decided that de-escalation is weakness and that only overwhelming response restores deterrence. If strikes remain limited to southern Lebanon launch sites and avoid urban Beirut, that tells you the diplomatic back channel is still operational and that the U.S. has successfully communicated that restraint keeps American support intact. Both outcomes are possible. The decision will be visible in target selection, not in the press releases that follow. In the next week, watch U.S. Navy carrier battle group movements in the eastern Mediterranean. The USS Harry S. Truman Carrier Strike Group is currently positioned 180 kilometers west of Cyprus. If that group moves east toward the Lebanese coast and into strike range of southern Lebanon, that tells you the United States is preparing to provide operational support for an Israeli escalation and that the diplomatic path has closed. If the group holds position or moves west, that tells you the U.S. is signaling that Israel is on its own if it chooses escalation, and that changes the Israeli calculus entirely. Carrier movement is not speculation. It is policy communication that does not require a press conference. In the next month, watch whether Israel announces Iron Dome procurement expansion, battery redeployment to cover infrastructure zones that were previously deprioritized, or public discussion of system limitations and the need for layered defense architecture that includes David's Sling and Arrow 3 for high-altitude threats. If the government announces expanded Iron Dome procurement and redeployment without acknowledging the system's mathematical limitations, that tells you the narrative is being preserved for domestic political consumption and that the lesson of Thursday has not been institutionally absorbed. If you see Israeli defense officials publicly discussing the need for architectural changes to the air defense network and integration of longer-range systems, that tells you the internal assessment concluded that Thursday was a systemic failure, not a tactical anomaly. That admission would be politically costly, but it would also signal that the next iteration of Israeli air defense will be harder to saturate. The adversary is watching the same signals. When Israeli strike target selection is confirmed in the next 48 hours, the analysis will be here. Not a summary, not a headline repeat. Evidence, assessment. What it means for the trajectory, in that order. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. What separates this channel from the coverage you are seeing everywhere else is that we do not tell you what happened and move on. We tell you what the decision makers are looking at, what the constraints are, and what the next 3 moves look like before they happen. The mainstream gives you the event. We give you the map. We are tracking carrier movements, Israeli cabinet leaks, Iranian diplomatic signaling through Swiss intermediaries, and Hezbollah media output for signs of whether Thursday's strike is being positioned as a one-time demonstration or the opening move in a sustained campaign.